Well, this week we will not be having our counselors on the hot seat. All the counselors, from what I've been told, are away at some type of meeting somewhere. I'm not sure exactly where they are. I'm not sure if it's FCM or what's going on, but they are not available. Not one counselor is available because of commitments, meetings elsewhere. I believe they're out of province. And again, whatever, doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. They're not available today. So we will not be having our counselors on the hot seat segment today. I know that many of you are upset by that or are let down by that because it's a popular segment and it's always lots of calls and lots to talk about. But we will make do and fill the time with other things. And counselors on the hot seat will return again next week. So sorry about the bad news, folks. If you were eagerly anticipating counselors and it's your way to get your juices flowing on a Monday, we'll have to figure out another way. I'd like to thank Vanessa Veinotte on the other side of the glass. The control board's doing a fine job as always. The head of the search and rescue team looking for signs of two young children who went missing in rural Nova Scotia a month ago says searchers have not found any new evidence. The search for 4-year-old Jack Sullivan and his 6-year-old sister Lily Sullivan, who were reported missing from their home in Lansdowne Station on way back in May 2nd, resumed this weekend for 2 days of targeted searching. Amy Hansen, Colchester County Ground Search and Rescue Manager, says this weekend's renewed search is focused on the Gairloch Road area near where the children lived and along a nearby pipeline trail where a small boot print was previously found. Hansen says the team of searchers are working hard to move through the rough and densely wooded terrain that's packed with thick brush and down trees from post-tropical storm Fiona, which hit the region in 2022. So again, no news, and that's sad, folks. Closure is what the community and I'm sure the family are looking for now at this point. Some type of closure, and the mystery continues and the speculation continues as well. Many conspiracy theories, I think, would be safe to describe them as such out there floating around without a lot of substance behind most of them, unfortunately. And all we can do is just hope that at some point we have some answers and some closure is available, again, in particular, to the family and to the community, because this story is tragic for sure, and it goes without saying that closure would help in all of this, and that can only come by through some answers, and hence I'm sure why the search continues to try and come up with some clues as to what might have happened. All right, we continue to look for answers as to what happened with Nova Scotia Power. And Nova Scotia Power CEO says up to 140,000 social insurance numbers could have been stolen by cyber thieves who recently hacked into the utility customers' records. Peter Gregg, who is not, sound like a broken record here, but has not replied, not even responded to my request for an interview, our request. We'll send another one out again today, but has been on CBC, it's been on CTV, and I'm not sure if he's done global or not, but nonetheless, he's done other media. For whatever reason, he won't do this show, but we'll continue to ask. Nonetheless, he says through other media, including the Canadian press, that the number of hacked social insurance numbers is about 140,000. And he says if there are the reason why they use social insurance numbers or why they need social insurance numbers, he says if there are a number of John McDonalds, if the social insurance number determines which one we, the utility, are talking to, he said during an interview at the Halifax headquarters of Emeritus subsidiary on Friday. Gregg said the data of about 280,000 Nova Scotia customers was breached in a ransomware attack. More than half of the total. Asked Thursday how many of these records contain the confidential 9-digit social insurance numbers, Gregg replied approximately half. Also, the Herald this morning reports that Nova Scotia Power executives have been called to appear at the legislature's Public Accounts Committee meeting this week to discuss the data breach. Here's a quote from the interim leader of the Liberal Party, Derek Monburquette, says, given the scope and seriousness of this incident, I'm writing to urgently request that the Public Accounts Committee convene an emergency meeting to hear directly from the Nova Scotia Power executives. Nova Scotians deserve answers, and we must act quickly to ensure their interests are protected. And we shall see what comes of this. I find it interesting, though, folks, that, again, reading other media reports, that to this point, nobody's being held accountable at Nova Scotia Power. And I would bet that when all is said and done, no executives will lose their jobs, no executives will be reprimanded, and likely bonuses will be paid out as well. And I read also this morning that Nova Scotia Power has insurance. They feel as though that the costs incurred by this will be covered by insurance, so they don't anticipate rate increases. Well, that's all well and good, but again, what about all of us who have received these letters and are left wondering and concerned about all of this? What are the next steps? Because monitoring your credit is something that most of us are forced to do at this point through TransUnion, which is the credit servicing monitoring agency which was provided to us for 2 years. And monitoring your bank accounts, contacting your bank. But look, the stress associated with this, folks, is real. And I think that people would love to have some level of responsibility and accountability at the corporate level, at Nova Scotia Power level. But don't hold your breath, folks. As far as I'm concerned, I don't think that's going to happen. I truly, truly don't. So some of the questions that I'll ask you today when we open the phone lines between 11 and 12 is, will Nova Scotia Power be held accountable in any way for this? Do you think when all is said and done and the dust settles, will Nova Scotia Power be held accountable in any way, whatever that accountability looks like? Will there be one job loss or one reprimand for people, for an organization which was clearly asleep at the switch? Will bonuses still be paid? And how much stress has this caused you? For a lot of people, look, some people have the ability to kind of go with the flow more than others. Other people get very stressed very easily by things like this, and I think justifiably so. So how have you been dealing with this? Have you been impacted by this? How have you been dealing with it? And how much stress has this caused you and your family? And what level of accountability and responsibility would you like to see Nova Scotia Power be held to? By the way, after the 10:30 news, I'll be chatting with Wayne MacKay, law professor emeritus, Dalhousie University, about all this, and I'll get his take on what can be done when it comes to potential class action lawsuit. Is that realistic? Is any litigious measure possible, either by an individual or a group or a class? When it comes to all of this, we'll get the ins and outs from Wayne MacKay, as mentioned, after the 10:30 news. All right, also, uranium development and natural resources development has been a hot button issue here in Nova Scotia as of late. And the government and industry push to explore for uranium deposits in Nova Scotia has met with pushback about property ownership and health concerns. This again in the Herald this morning. Tory Rushton, the province's natural resources minister, said Thursday he can exercise his ministerial authority to grant uranium exploration rights to a company without a private landowner's approval, but he does not want to do that. So whenever anybody says, look, I have the right to do this and I can do this, but I don't want to, that's code for I will if I have. I look out. I would bet that they will exercise it. The caveat, well, I don't really want to, but don't forget I have the authority to do so, and I think is code for I certainly will, and likely this will happen. He goes on to say in the story, right now we're encouraging landowners and the researchers to have the conversations. That's where it needs to start, close quote. Where it started was provincial government legislation passed in late March to repeal a ban on uranium exploration and mining had been legislated by the NDP government in 2009. The aim is to allow for research and to support industry to pursue new opportunities. The government has since issued a request for proposals from companies interested in exploring for uranium in 3 designated areas in the province where higher levels of the mineral are known to exist, including in an area near East Dalhousie, in Annapolis County, Louisville and Pictou County, and the Millette Brook area of Hants County. Rushton went on to say some exploration companies have notified the department that they are interested in uranium exploration. So, other additional questions that you can talk about when we open the phone lines in association with this are, do you trust the minister when he says he does not want to exercise his ministerial authority to grant uranium exploration rights to a company without a private landowner's approval? Do you believe him when he says that? All right. Also, do you share concerns over property owners' rights and health concerns? Are you one of these property owners potentially? Are you in a community where this exploration will be conducted? And what about health concerns? Or will there always be opposition to this kind of development? And do we need to press forward? Economic picture is too bleak not to. Is when all is said and done, is it just does it come down to that our economic picture is just too bleak if we do not come up with some way to increase revenues, and significantly, we will simply not be able to survive under the current economic model? When I say survive, I mean provide the services in which we all need, and the growing demand for healthcare and everything else, road infrastructure, whatever the province provides. Will it become unsustainable, or is it already unsustainable and we need this type of exploration and development when it comes to natural resources? What's your take on all of this? And also this story, Nova Scotia has announced a month-long public survey as it considers expanding alcohol sales to various retail outlets like corner stores. Finance Minister John Lord says examining how alcohol is sold and consumed makes sense as the province moves to eliminate interprovincial trade barriers. The province will survey 1,500 Nova Scotians over the age of 19 starting this week. Actually, I think it's already started. So my question to you is, what are your thoughts on alcohol consumption, or rather alcohol purchasing in other expanded retail outlets? Alcohol is currently served at over 300 retail locations in the province. Should we expand alcohol sales, yes or no? Why or why not? And would it result in more drinking? Bottom line. Would you drink more if you had more access to alcohol? I don't know that I would. I'm not a big drinker anyway, in all seriousness. But I don't know that having it even more convenient and readily available would lead to more alcohol consumption. I'm not sure that would be the case. So that's another question that I'll ask you. What are your thoughts on this? And we'll be talking later in the show about this from a couple of different angles. Kara Thompson, Associate Professor and Research Chair in Substance Use at St. Francis Xavier University, will join us. She opposes the idea. And Sandra Mullen will join us, NSGEU President, and they support the expansion of alcohol sales in Nova Scotia. We'll talk about that after the 12 o'clock news with both those guests. We'll give 2 different perspectives on this. And again, I'll ask you your opinion on this when we open the phone lines between 11 and 12. Also, the Stanley Cup Final finally resumes Wednesday night. Edmonton Oilers, and it's a rematch between the Edmonton Oilers and Florida Panthers. Edmonton last year lost the first 3 games, stormed back to win the next 3, only to lose in overtime of Game 7. Heartbreaking loss. Can the Edmonton Oilers win it and get it done this year? What are your thoughts on this, folks? Is it finally Canada's turn to bring the Stanley Cup home? And does that matter to you? Do you support a Canadian team? Do you care if it's a Canadian team in the Stanley Cup Final? And do you think that the Edmonton Oilers have a good shot against Florida? Florida, of course, is incredible. The way they dismantled Carolina says a lot. And of course, they beat the Leafs in 7 games. Not that it says is an indication of too much, but nonetheless, what are your thoughts on the Stanley Cup Final? Will you watch? And is the season just simply too long? I would suggest that it is just simply too long. So we got lots and lots to get to today, folks. Thanks so much for tuning in and listening. We appreciate it very much. Those are just some of the things that are percolating to the top of my mind. Hopefully, you'll want to talk with them, as mentioned, when we open the phone lines in about 45 minutes' time. Landlord converting more than 120 Halifax apartments into condos. Property owners say it's become too expensive to run the buildings as rentals. We'll discuss this when we come back. I saw this story on the CBC website. 2 apartment buildings in Halifax's North End with more than 120 units between them are being converted into condominiums, and the owners say it's because operating the properties as rentals has become financially impractical. Joining us to discuss all of this is Kevin Russell, Rental Housing Providers of Nova Scotia. Kevin, thanks for joining the show.
Todd, thanks for having me on.
All right, so many tenants of the 2 4-story buildings on Mont Blanc Terrace started to hear rumblings about the conversion last fall. Some have already moved out or are making arrangements to leave. Others say they can't, they're not ready to go. And when it comes to the reason why the sale is necessary, the owners simply say that the operating expenses have not caught up or have not held up with the current rental cap arrangement here in or rent control here in Nova Scotia. So tell us about, I guess, if you will, some of the details of this, if you have any.
Well, in general, Todd, I can tell you that everything is more expensive to own and operate rental housing buildings. We have seen major increases in taxes, energy, water, insurance, mortgages, and maintenance costs over the last 5 years since the temporary rent cap was introduced in 2020. Rent control stops property owners from raising the money they need to pay for these essentials. There's a lot of buildings are getting older. There's needs for roof replacements and major maintenance and building code upgrades, and it's just unaffordable for these owners to be able to keep up with the rising costs because of the rent cap.
Okay, how common is this, or it's not really all that common according to the story as of yet, but might it become more common as an option? If you're referring to conversion to condos, no.
Yes. We don't expect what's happening there with Mont Blanc will start a trend, or is the start of a trend. Condo conversions take a lot of time. They're very complicated, and they're heavily regulated by the provincial government. So, for most property owners who are struggling financially with skyrocketing costs, they'll sell their buildings or sell their properties, or in some cases they'll just leave the units empty rather than convert them to anything like condos or anything else. It's just a complicated process, and it's not for everybody.
Why leave them empty when we have a housing crisis?
Well, the fact is that, this is very common in a rent control environment where owners will choose to leave units empty because they can't get the return they need to be able to keep it up to maintenance standards. And so they'll just leave them empty. And in some cases, when a unit turns over in some buildings, they'll leave it empty because they can't afford to do the necessary repairs and upgrades and painting and everything that's associated with doing a unit turn. So they're left empty.
Okay, but would it not make sense to recoup some costs by having it rented than have nobody in there?
Well, the business 101, Todd, is revenues have to exceed expenses, and so if you're selling your product below what it costs you to maintain it, it's not a sustainable business model.
Okay, you mentioned that in some cases that they're looking to sell the units, to sell the buildings in their entirety. Who's interested in buying them if this is the financial situation that they'd be inheriting? Well,
a couple of things, Tom. Todd, there's we got to separate the market. You have the smaller mom and pop operations, which have single family home rentals, duplex rentals, and they can be easily converted to single family home ownership. and so they will sell back into that market. The others, the larger buildings, if they're for sale, they will, the potential buyers will look at that and see where it's at, and take a look at the property and see if there's any development opportunities or other opportunities to improve the building and upgrade the buildings.
Okay, so in this particular case, they've decided that it would be easier to parse it out as condos, and from what I'm looking at, the prices would not be inexpensive, $400 to $600 per square foot, putting the building's units at a range of which range would be between 1,000 to 1,500 square feet, so that the units would go anywhere from $400,000 to $900,000. So pretty pricey asks for people who are renting to come up with that kind of money, right? Obviously.
Well, if that's the price range, it would be tough for renters to purchase. There's no question. We'll have to see how this rolls out. But again, it's the market dynamics, and that's what people are going to be confronted with, and it's unfortunate. We've been saying for years that a lot of these buildings are struggling, and they're not financially viable. And we mentioned that several times over the years, and I know in past interviews I've had with you that one of the options is to repurpose properties and repurpose buildings. So people owning these buildings are looking at every option they can to be able to stabilize the financial viability of the property.
Okay, what are your thoughts on fixed-term leases? There's been a lot of discussion about fixed-term leases. Do you feel as though they're here to stay? And because I know that property owners feel as though they certainly have a role, what are you concerned that the government may look at these and revoke them, or what are your thoughts on the long-term sustainability or viability of a fixed-term lease?
Well, we still maintain that they play a vital role in the rental market to keep new Canadians, first-time renters, fixed income and low-income wage earners housed. And if without them, there'll be simply the Campbell that breaks the straw back for a lot of owners, and they'll probably end up selling their units, as we talked about earlier. But, what is the long-term future? We hope they stay. I mean, we don't know. We don't have that crystal ball. But it would be a serious impact on the rental market if they were to leave, and would probably end up increasing homelessness as people will end up losing their rental units. Okay,
so back to this building being converted to apartments into condos. You don't anticipate that is going to happen on a large scale here in the city at all?
Can't see it, Todd. It's like I said, it's a very complicated process. It takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of time, and it's very complicated, and they're very heavily regulated. So it's something that I can't see as a trend or a mass conversion of buildings to condos. I just can't see that happening.
Okay, Kevin, appreciate your time as always. We'll talk again. Thank you.
Todd, thank you very much.
All right, take care. Kevin Russell, Rental Housing Providers of Nova Scotia. We'll talk more about the cyber breach and with Nova Scotia Power and the possibility of a class action lawsuit or lack thereof when we come back.
Thanks.
Right, Nova Scotia Power CEO says up to 140,000 social insurance numbers could have been stolen by cyber thieves who recently hacked into the utility customer records. Peter Gregg says that the privately owned utility collected numbers from customers to authenticate their identities. Joining us to talk about all this is Wayne MacKay, law professor emeritus at Dalhousie University. Wayne, thanks for joining the show. We appreciate your time.
No problem.
All right, so a lot of people are asking about what can be done, what might be done, what rights do ratepayers and those impacted have here. when it comes to potential legal action, I suppose it's natural for people to want to hold people accountable when it comes to this type of thing. But what does the law say? What realistically can or set expectations, I suppose, for people?
Okay, as you say, it's certainly a very natural question because this is a big issue. I mean, it's a big issue to have any amount of data stolen, but with the huge number here, with 280,000 people affected, it's a huge issue. And of particular concern is the fact that among the kinds of information are included social insurance numbers, which gives the hackers access to just about anything. So that's the context. In terms of what the law says about that, it's a little more complicated. And I guess maybe I'll just start with this and then I'll take it one of the directions first. There's a role for the, oddly enough, Canadian Privacy Commissioner under the relevant Privacy Act dealing with companies, private companies, in terms of regulating them. But I assume what most customers are looking for is actually suability, or what can I do if I discover I'm a victim of this? And even for that matter, already people are victims in the sense that they have to change things and spend time and so on. And can I get any compensation for that? I would assume those are the two major threads, and I can go through either of those first, whichever you'd like. But I want to be sure to give you enough time for the main one, which is the lawsuit thing.
Yeah, sure. Let's talk about that first off. The first two that you mentioned.
Okay. So first of all, the situation varies somewhat across the country, and in Nova Scotia, unfortunately, we're not in one of the better places for a possible lawsuit against Nova Scotia Power. And the difficulty is that in the regulation of private companies and how they use our data that they collect, that the statute that regulates that in Nova Scotia is the federal one, because we don't have an equivalent provincial statute. Some places do, such as Quebec and British Columbia for sure. I think maybe Alberta as well, but very few. Only a few provinces do. And those provincial statutes, at least especially the ones in British Columbia, go quite a bit further to hold the data collector as well as the hacker potentially suable for these kind of things. That's not the case in Nova Scotia, because we don't have a statute at the moment, and therefore the common law applies. And there's two kinds of ways of pursuing that. One is there is an increasingly used common law tort of invasion of privacy, or what's actually called intrusion into seclusion, but it's basically invasion of privacy. But there's two major problems with that. One is that is against the hacker, not against Nova Scotia Power, because Nova Scotia Power is not the invader of the privacy. It's the hackers that are. Nova Scotia Power is the middle person who collected your data and did stuff with it, but they're not the target. So that's one problem with going that common law or civil action to do it. And the second is that you have to prove damages to you. That is very difficult to do, because how do you establish that the fraud that was perpetrated on you, which you have to prove, and the cost to you was directly linked to what Nova Scotia Power did, or even the hacker in some ways, but especially Nova Scotia Power. So that's the first line. The second line of attack might have a little more glimmer of hope, although it's a difficult one, and that's a civil action for negligence. And there, the argument would be that Nova Scotia Power, in its collection or protection and distribution of the data, did not behave up to the proper standard and were negligent in exposing your private information or personal information, such as your SIN number and other things, to possibly being hacked. And that if they are below the standard of proper operation in that regard, then they might be liable for negligence and owe something to you. So those are the two routes in Nova Scotia. If you were in another province, that, such as BC, for example, they have statutes which allow that you can sue both the hacker and the data collector, not just the hacker. And secondly, that you don't have to prove specific damage to you. The fact that the fact that your personal data has been stolen, and without proving exactly how it's been used, you can have a successful action. And thirdly, which is quite important, you can be part of a class action. You don't have to do it individually. So you can see that being in BC would be a much better position right now.
So because we don't have a statute, a class action is not a possibility here in Nova Scotia. Is that am I interpreting you properly?
That seems to be the case, because there were 4 cases, 2 in Ontario, which where they don't really have a statute, or at least not one like BC. And the courts of appeal, 2 court cases of the Court of Appeal in Ontario said you cannot certify a class action. And in fact, you can't even really successfully sue, because you'd have to prove damages and you'd have to target the hacker. So same as Nova Scotia. Mm-hmm. Whereas 2 very recent, just a few months ago, decisions in British Columbia have said there, where you do have this statute dealing with regulating companies and their use of personal information, that you can sue as a class action and you do not have to prove damages, and it can be against the data collector, somebody like Nova Scotia Power. So that's the main pitch I would make, as time always goes quickly, is Nova Scotia really should enact one of these kinds of acts, because everybody's saying these kinds of hacking into data is an increasing thing. It's not going to go away. It's happening more often all the time, and it's happening in large ways. So consumers need better protection than they currently have.
All right. So if the government did respond and did pass legislation, I'm assuming it would be legislation that would require this statute. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. The legislation would actually be something like the Privacy Regulation Act in British Columbia, that provides these protections beyond the regular civil lawsuit. I mean, you definitely can sue the hacker, but of course the problem there is who knows who the hacker is, and even if you do, what kind of resources do they have, all those kind of major issues. And I presume most people at this point are mostly, at least, well, they're angry with both, but angry with Nova Scotia Power. And at least we know Nova Scotia Power has some resources to pay. And they have, to be fair. They are doing some things to try to respond to this. But anyway, that's basically, in a relatively short version, where the lawsuit lies. So there's not great news in that our current law doesn't give you much chance of success in pursuing Nova Scotia Power, and not much chance of success in pursuing the hacker, even if they are identified.
Okay, so the statute is not even there. It's not even up to date or out of date. It doesn't even exist. Well, can you speculate as to why Nova Scotia would not have created a statute like this, and why BC would have?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, first of all, I didn't want to make this too complicated, but Nova Scotia does have privacy regulation laws, the FOIPOP, for example, but that's in relation to government agencies and in relation to, both the freedom of information and the protection of privacy. What they don't have is, like the BC law, in addition to that, a statute that regulates private companies and what they do with various organizations, which of course raises an interesting little context point, since Nova Scotia Power used to be more public and was privatized at some point earlier on. But in any event, means there's nothing there now, and they would have to have a statute like that. So that's the situation. And I guess as to why, it seems to me there really isn't any particularly good reason. in that I would have thought any government, and maybe it's the case with the Nova Scotia government, would want to provide as much protection for consumers of agent and consumers and regulation of private companies that collect people's personal data. And it's particularly compelling in a case like Nova Scotia Power, because this is not really a particularly optional thing. Most people need power in some form. So it's not a case where you can say, well, you're asking for too much of my personal information. I don't want to take that risk, so I'm not buying your goods. We really don't have a lot of choice in most cases here, right?
Okay, so
I guess to answer your question, I can't think of any particularly good reason, except maybe the problem and its frequency is becoming more apparent now than it used to be.
Right. You mentioned a federal statute. Is that something that could be invoked or used at all, or no?
Yes. Now that's a good point. Yes, it can, and it is being. The federal privacy statute called PIPEDA, but I won't go into. I think it's Personal Information Protection and Electronics Documents Act. But anyway, that statute and the Canadian Privacy Commissioner can regulate people like Nova Scotia Power who collect personal information and data as part of their commercial activity and make them accountable for doing it in an appropriate way. And that's a good thing. They have a number of principles that they require them to adhere to. They need to be transparent, and that's always an important issue. They need to inform people promptly when they know that your data has been stolen, which seems to be the case with Nova Scotia Power. They've done that. But they also need to have a secure system for protecting your data. So this is aimed at being more preventive in that it's saying we want you to set up a system and use a system of data protection that makes it unlikely that your data is going to be stolen or then used in a fraudulent way. So that is happening now, as I understand. The Canadian Privacy Commissioner is involved in giving advice to Nova Scotia Power and helping them to understand what they do need to do. But the big limitation on that is that that's a regulator that can fine Nova Scotia Power up to $100,000, but has no power to give individual compensation to customers. So it's a regulatory agency, not a compensating agency in the way that a lawsuit or a statute creating a civil action would be.
So bottom line, under the current rules in which they exist and the law here in Nova Scotia, don't hold your breath for people out there who think that they might be compensated in some way for Nova Scotia Power for this inconvenience or at the very least inconvenience. Don't hold your breath. That's the message?
Unfortunately, that is the message. I tried to put it as least starkly as possible, but unfortunately, you figured it out. That is pretty well it. Although I think that it may be a good time for people to start thinking about, should we be lobbying our government to provide some statutory protection like they have in BC and some of those other provinces.
Okay, Wayne, appreciate it. Thanks so much, my friend.
No problem. Take care.
All right, take care. Wayne MacKay, Law Professor Emeritus, Dalhousie University. Everyone counts in HRM. Latest point in time count report released revealing critical insights into homelessness here in HRM. That when we come back.
Backs.
Right, the Affordable Housing Association of Nova Scotia and its partners released the Everyone Counts in HRM 2024 Point in Time Count Report. Joining us to discuss all of this is Michael Kabalen, Executive Director of Affordable Housing Association of Nova Scotia. Mike, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so tell us about, first of all, your organization. What are you guys all about?
Yeah, the Affordable Housing Association, or AHANS, is first and foremost, we're the community entity for a federally funded program called Reaching Home. Essentially, we get a bunch of federal dollars and we use that to make strategic investments towards ending homelessness in the region. And then we also use those investments to gain better insight and data around what's happening with homelessness. We're also builders, buyers, managers of a scaling portfolio of affordable housing, which is kind of a great complement to the work around homelessness, of course.
Okay, so tell us about the point in time survey that you conducted here.
So every 2 years, we go out and we try to speak with every person experiencing homelessness that we can, and we call it the point in time count.
Right.
This year, we found out that the number has almost doubled since the last time we did that. That's not a surprise. While the number is shocking, 1,132 people as the number we were able to count, which is the bare minimum number. There's people that aren't in the system we would have been able to reach, but are still in a state of unhoused, right? That was significant, and that's more than the population of Mahone Bay, for example. Yeah. But certainly that number are people and behind them. And so we know those numbers. Weekly we get information on who's experiencing homelessness, and we report those numbers through another piece of data that we call the by name list. But through the point in time count, we do a very in-depth survey for anyone that will answer. And so we gain a lot of insight and data as to why people are experiencing homelessness, the things that might have contributed to it. We had a better understanding as to how long someone might be experiencing homelessness. So this time, the number of people experiencing chronic homelessness almost tripled, which means people who are entering homelessness aren't getting out of it as quickly. They're not finding housing. They're not finding somewhere that isn't, a shelter or some other government-funded service that's kind of keeping them in the state of limbo, looking for something better.
Why do you think that is? What are some of the fundamental core reasons as to why that is?
So one of the number one reason we found people who are experiencing homelessness isn't one of the stereotypes. We like to apply stereotypes to people experiencing homelessness to try and separate that they're like me. But 39% of the people we spoke to on the night of the point in time count were there not because of any of those stereotypes. They just simply didn't have enough money to get by. They couldn't afford rent or a mortgage or all their other housing costs, in addition to food, medication, or anything else that they spend money on. And that caused them to lose their housing and fall into that state of homelessness. That's significant. The second most reason we found out that people were experiencing homelessness was some type of breakdown in their family unit, whether that be abuse from a partner or some sort of dispute with family. So think about your parents maybe kicking you out if you're younger, or your roommate situation breaks down. So those are the two significant, at 39% of the people we spoke to and about 14% of the people we spoke to, which that's a big chunk of the people we had a chance to talk to. Yeah. So I think one of the challenges here is we assume someone experiencing homelessness meets a certain profile that is maybe different than us. But the data tells us that isn't the case, right? So that's a really significant finding on our part. Another important distinction to make is what we found on the night of the count. The people that are experiencing homelessness aren't necessarily unsheltered, and I think that's a very important distinction to make. We're not talking about people in encampments and people who are, living outdoors or sleeping rough, as many call it. People are being offered options. So there's two stories happening here. I think there's a lot of investment that's been made in what I call warehousing people experiencing homelessness. But the point in time count demonstrates that a significant amount of more work needs to happen in creating the type of housing that's going to prevent people from falling into homelessness and get people out quickly when they experience it.
Also, the duration, 75% of people have been homeless for at least 6 months in the preceding year compared to this 24% back in 2022. That's massive.
Yeah, again, I think that speaks to the barriers that people are facing once you experience homelessness. And you think about what would happen. If you lost your housing, you're more likely to have a hard time keeping the job or finding a job. Yep. And so then how do you find housing again? How do you kind of get out of that predicament? And that's why we measure that chronic homelessness piece, because those types of things start to happen to you the longer you experience homelessness, right? Just the trauma of having nowhere to hang your hat every night does something to you, which makes it more challenging and requires more resources to get you out of homelessness. And so why we want to rapidly end homelessness for people, if it happens, is because they're more likely to thrive for the rest of their life when we do. Yeah.
Okay, so now you've got this data. What next? What do you hope happens next?
Well, I think part of our kind of campaign this time around getting the message out around these numbers is we know income is a problem, and we know who can make the investments required to help people with income, right? So that becomes a conversation around what inflation has done over the last number of years to our neighbors and our friends and the people who live in our municipality. I think the other piece is, despite the significant amount of work and investment that's being made around affordable housing, it's still not enough, right? So there's a national and a federal conversation that's going to be coming out of Ottawa. I think Prime Minister Carney has spoken significantly about the need for more housing. I think we need to, those your listeners and those of us that know the problem exists need to be vocal about the need for affordable housing and the types of affordable and the types of supportive housing that the folks that we counted on the night of November 25th need. Yeah.
And ironically, it gets more attention as it gets worse, right? The problem as it expands will get more attention and more clout politically.
I'm not sure. I think that I would challenge, just in the conversations I've been having with the release of this data, I would have said a couple of years ago there was a lot more attention to this challenge, and I'm really worried that. And I talked about the stereotypes that people experiencing homelessness we apply to them. I'm really worried that people don't realize that the people are just like you and me that we're talking about. And that concerns me where, there's this kind of homelessness fatigue is what we call it.
Yeah.
It's happening right across North America where people don't want to talk about it anymore because they just it has continued to get worse despite the investments that are being made. So I think we're talking about it today because we have a robust data set and the reports on our website www.ahans.ca if you want to read more in detail. If you're from an overrepresented population and you want to hear more about those details as well, because we did find both African Nova Scotians and Indigenous communities are much more represented in the numbers than they are in the broader census numbers of what they represent in our population as well. And so, for me, the conversation needs to kind of be renewed and remember that we're talking about our neighbors. We're a thriving first world economy and we're talking about homelessness and we're talking about a significant number, as I said, bigger than the population of Mahone Bay with nowhere to live, nowhere to hang their hat at night. And it takes nothing but government investment and public outcry to end this, right? There is a robust sector of community housing providers or nonprofit housing providers. AHANS is one of but a few, or one of many rather, that could go out and build and buy and create the types of housing that is necessary. I think we have a willing partner in government in many instances as well, but the dollars that need to be invested and the barriers that exist to creating the types of housing still exist. And I think, unless the public make it a priority, like I am today talking to you, it'll continue to be something that we're going to struggle with.
Okay, is the report available online? I'm assuming that it would be.
I mentioned it's on our website, www.ahans.ca, and it'll be the first thing you see when it pops up.
Okay, Mike, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate it. All right, you got it. Michael Kabalen, Executive Director of the Affordable Housing Association of Nova Scotia. Your calls when we come back.
Facts.
All right, taking your calls. The way to reach us is 902-405-6000. Again, 902-405-6000. That is the way to reach us. What is on your mind on this Monday? 902-405-6000. Obviously, a lot of you still concerned and have issues with the Nova Scotia Power situation. Nova Scotia Power CEO says up to 140,000 social insurance numbers could have been stolen by cyber thieves who recently hacked the utility's customers' records. Peter Gregg said that the privately owned utility collected numbers from customers to authenticate their identities. And I think I read somewhere saying that it wasn't mandatory, but voluntarily people gave their social insurance numbers. And I always have issues with that when you're applying for credit or you're applying for power or something like that, and they ask you the question, or it's included in the application. You're likely going to include it because you want to get the credit or you want to get approved, and we're trusting, I suppose. So I don't really buy that it was not forced to be for people to provide the social insurance number because it's almost implied, right? But nonetheless, what are your thoughts on all of this, folks? What are your thoughts on the fact that Wayne MacKay, who was just on the show after the 10:30 news earlier in the show, Dalhousie University law professor emeritus, said that because of the law or lack thereof, and a lack of a statute here in Nova Scotia which protects customers and residents, like in BC, there is a statute in place that would allow for a class action lawsuit or civil litigation. But basically, his message is because the law doesn't exist here in Nova Scotia, fat chance in getting any monetary retribution through this. That was basically Wayne's message. So for those of you out there asking for a class action lawsuit, it's not going to happen, basically, here in Nova Scotia. So what recourse do we have? Well, we don't really have any, other than we look for accountability from Nova Scotia Power. What does accountability look like? Well, I wouldn't hold your breath in expecting to see anybody lose their jobs over this. But I'll ask you the question, what does accountability look like here in Nova Scotia, in your opinion? What would you like to see, or what should be done besides any type of lawsuit on behalf of the public? Because that's simply not going to happen, according to Wayne MacKay, and the fact that the Nova Scotia statutes don't exist in order to allow for that. So what does accountability look like to you? What do you think should be done or could be done when it comes to Nova Scotia Power here? Should jobs be lost? Should people be reprimanded officially? What could or should be done here? Or will there be any type of level of accountability and responsibility here when it comes to Nova Scotia Power and this serious breach? 902-405-6000. Also, how much stress has this caused you, and is it causing you? Are you losing sleep over it? Tell me about your situation. How stressed are you over this? Obviously, a lot of people, depending on their ability to handle stress, it varies. But for many of you out there, you're quite stressed about this because I've received lots of emails. And we've taken lots of calls on all of this. 902-405-6000. That's the way to reach us. Again, 902-405-6000. Also, a government and industry push to explore for uranium deposits in Nova Scotia has met with pushback about property ownership and health concerns. Tory Reston, the province's natural resources minister, said he can exercise his ministerial authority to grant uranium exploration rights to a company without a private landowner's approval, but he does not want to do that. So does this concern you that the government, if they feel that your property might be worthy of exploration and a company wants to do so, that they can force you to comply with that? Although, again, they say that they would prefer not to. Is that cold comfort for you? What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that the government should have the right to do this? Or do you feel as though it tramples on property owners' rights? And also, when it comes to uranium exploration and other natural resources, do you feel as though this is something that we should be moving forward with, despite all of the concerns out there concerning health and water and habitat and all these legitimate issues that people raise? But conversely, there are legitimate issues about our finances as a province. And the Premier talked about it on this show, in the studio recently. That GDP per capita, we are dead last in the United States and Canada combined, all 60 jurisdictions combined. We are dead last, GDP per capita. That's right, folks, last. And if things don't turn around and we don't find some revenue and some long-term sustainable and viable alternatives, that the province will be in serious shape, serious condition when it comes to its services that it can provide or not. So do we need to forge ahead, folks, when it comes to exploration of things like uranium, despite the challenges and despite the property rights owners? Obviously is another component to all this as well. So that 902-405-6000. Also, Nova Scotia has announced a month-long public survey as it considers expanding alcohol sales to various retail outlets like corner stores. The finance minister says examining how alcohol is sold and consumed makes sense as the province moves to eliminate interprovincial trade barriers. The province will survey 1,500 Nova Scotians over the age of 19, started last week, actually. It'll also gather feedback on the types of stores where alcohol can be sold, locations where people can drink alcohol, and health considerations related to any changes. So, do you think that we should be expanding where alcohol is sold? Do you have concerns with that? Yes or no? And why or why not? 902-405-6000. That's the way to reach us. Again, 902-405-6000. All right, let's dive into this. Talk to Nicole. Hello, Nicole.
Hi, Todd. How are you?
I'm well. You?
Good. So we just heard everything that we can't do
to
Nova Scotia Power.
Yeah.
So this is why it's so important to look at this beyond the scope of just cybersecurity and look at the foundational contract failures. So if we don't have statutes available to us, what do we have available to us? Well, we have the Nova Scotia Public Utilities Act, and Section 52 of the Public Utility Act specifically is duty to furnish safe and adequate service. Section 52A, subsection 3M, is specific to data handling. So what's now available to us inside of the Public Utility Act? Well, we know that the Public Utility Act is bound to the regulations that the UARB seems to be operating with Nova Scotia Power with. That's where our power was removed from us and placed in the hands of the UARB, who doesn't seem to be doing anything that's actually in the public interest. But that's because their role isn't to work in the public interest. Their role is to preserve economic impact in Nova Scotia. So when I look at what's available inside of the Public Utility Act and how it keeps pointing back to these regulations. And these regulations are creating fundamental contract failures between the customers of Nova Scotia Power and the company. What's now available to us? And that is the conversation that I would really like a commercial lawyer and a corporate lawyer to start weighing in on, because for contracts to be valid, there has to be 5 elements that are met, and that's offer, acceptance, consideration, capacity, and mutuality. And what we do not have with Nova Scotia Power is capacity and mutuality, and it can't be assumed because their agreements don't even allow people to see the terms and conditions, the data policies, anything. So just like they had to get Al Capone on tax evasion, what do we have to do to start contracting and operating with Nova Scotia Power fairly? And we have to look at the contracts.
Or lack thereof.
Or lack thereof, exactly. And until we dig into that, nothing's going to happen. The UARB is going to remain what I consider to be out of control, unless they're held in their jurisdiction, which means they must follow the law. So we have to start looking at the conscionability of these contracts, because when you don't have your terms and conditions, you know, if you sign an account or whatever with Bell and Eastlink, you have a very clear contract, and it also talks about the rates that you're going to pay and what those increases are going to look like. We don't have that with Nova Scotia Power. They won't put it and formalize it in a contract because the UARB says they don't have to, and then they run to the UARB to speak on our behalf, who we don't elect and we don't appoint.
Right.
But yet they hold all of our consent inside of these contracts that we don't have access to and can't reference. This is the transparency that we need, and this is where the conversation really has to shift. Cybersecurity, it's a byproduct of this. Does that make sense?
Yep, sure.
Yeah. So I don't want people to feel discouraged that there's nothing we can do. There's absolutely things we can do, but we have to actually understand what everyone is operating inside of right now, and that's the Public Utilities Act and the board-approved regulations. And only once we have a handle on that can we find a path forward with Nova Scotia Power.
So you say we find a path forward. Are you talking about collectively or individually? This is the challenge, right?
Both. People can be outraged all they want, but if they're not willing to take action, I don't know what to tell them. Mm-hmm. We have to start taking responsibility for the contracts that we're in, and we can't just wait for other people to do it. So if you have the internet, you can pull up the Public Utility Act and you can look at it. Section 54 and 83 are the most important sections we can really figure out. If you don't understand what you're reading, drop it into AI. Worst case scenario, you get a little bit of gobbledygook, but it is going to start to give you a better understanding. Start having these conversations with each other. Call Nova Scotia Power and ask them to produce the contract that they're not willing to produce. And when they push back, ask them why. Get this stuff in writing. The more it's documented, the more we can see it, the more that we can begin to make sense that these are not good faith agreements that we're operating inside of, the more empowered we become to start taking action. And when you see something, you then know how to start to hold the appropriate people accountable, which is something that you've spoken a lot about, is like, how do we hold them accountable? We can only do it inside of the contract. So we have to figure out what is that contract. And it's not with the statutes for cybersecurity, and it's not with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. It's inside of the Public Utility Act and the regulations.
Interesting, Nicole. Thanks for the call. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Todd.
All right, take care. 902-405-6000. We'll continue with your calls when we come back. All right, taking your calls, 902-405-6000. Quick email from Carlos and back to the phones. Carlos says, I have to disagree with your guest who stated the Nova Scotia Power acted in a prompt and transparent manner. First, I do not feel Nova Scotia Power was transparent that providing social insurance numbers was voluntary and provided no details how private information would be kept, how it would be used, and for how long it would be retained. Like many, I got a general letter only last week in the mail indicating my personal information was compromised. While Nova Scotia Power would have details on specifically what information was compromised, those details were not provided to me. This lack of information left me compromised into what danger this is to me personally and financially, and what measures I should take. That comes from Carlos. Now, Carlos, I have heard from some people who have called Nova Scotia Power and managed to talk to somebody And I think that they will let you know whether your social insurance number was compromised or not. I think. I'm not sure, but it seems to me going off memory that's the case. So what is on your mind today? Perhaps you want to continue to talk about this issue or whatever else you've got in your mind. 902-405-6000. Roland, hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, you?
Walking and talking, partner.
There you go.
As far as landowner rights here in Nova Scotia, we actually don't have any. You own the top 18 inches of your ground.
Yeah.
And the old deeds say that you're tenant in privilege to the Crown. So we're still run by the family compact and the executive council. They can take whatever you own and tell you to hit the trail. And they give you an offer. Here's what we think's fair market value. And if you don't like it, hire a lawyer and see how good you do doing that.
Yeah, there you go. It's cold comfort, isn't it? So when it comes to property owners' rights, you may think that you own your land, but you that could be taken from you quite easily.
Well, it's like those people that had the tree farm and stuff next to that gold mine.
Yeah.
They were told to pack up and get,
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the gypsum company up here in Hants County. They cut off government roads and put the farmers and everybody on the trail. You really have no rights except to pay your taxes and do whatever the executive council tells you. That's what Trump's trying to do down the States.
Yeah.
He'd like to be the emperor of the world and Putin another one. Well, our government ain't much different. They just do a better job of hiding it.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, Roland, thanks for the call. Appreciate it. 902-405-6000. Ted, hello.
Yeah. In the summertime, though,
Hi, Ted.
August Peel has some pretty nice classic shows out.
Ted, are you there?
Parking lot behind his.
Okay, we'll put Ted on hold. He's obviously chatting with somebody else. 902-405-6000. That's the way to reach us. Again, 902-405-6000. What is on your mind today? Again, I'm sure that a lot of people will be and are concerned with, and rightfully so, what continues to go on with Nova Scotia Power and this privacy breach. Brian's giving us a call. Hello, Brian. Hi, Brian.
Hello, Todd. How you doing this morning?
I'm well. You?
Good. Everyone's talking about the mineral rights. I only get to listen a couple of times here or there a week, depending on where I am, what I'm doing. So I don't know if any of these subjects I'm going to bring up now or have been brought up in the past week or so. You had the Premier on, I don't know, one day last week or a week and a half ago, and he talked about how far we are down on the list of GDP or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And he talked about, bringing the resources back and the small towns. Every small town throughout the province at one time had mills and foundries and all these other things. That is true. And historically, we did have money back then, but times changed. And it seems, from a layman's perspective, from the outside looking in, is that all those things eventually got gobbled up by conglomerates. They became less competitive because somebody else would outbid us, and governments would bend over backwards in other areas to accommodate these things, and everything ended up moving away and being centralized. And when it comes to the uranium, I am on the fence about this. I'm not a landowner that would ever be impacted. I live in an urban area, so that I don't have a stake in the game in that sense. But I do have an appreciation for the outdoors. I hunt and I fish and I camp and I do all those things. And I see areas that have been clear-cut, and I see areas that, have been damaged historically with gold mining. I've been to the current mine umpteen different times in my line of work, and I would love for anybody out there. I've looked online, and I can't find any information, at least nothing that I can discern. And I'm not the most intelligent person in the world, but how much money did that Australian company take out of this province in gold and leave us with a huge environmental mess? No one's talking about that recently because they've decided to close up operations because the province wouldn't give them another permit to keep going. Mm-hmm. So they've decided they're going to pack up and sell the property and move on. Well, There is a lake. They call it a settling pond. But Lord help me, Jesus, if you look on Google Earth or you drive out there and look for yourself, this settling pond is twice the size of the Halifax Commons and 40 or 50 feet deep. It's a lake, and it's full of chemicals and sediment that will have to be treated in perpetuity, that someone's going to have to look after that, and who's that going to be? So yes, I don't mind the idea of bringing new resource development to the province, but it's time that they put in the toughest rules and regulations in this country, maybe let alone the world. These companies come in, make tons of promises, then they get what they want, and they leave. It's happened in Northern Pulp. It's happened in all kinds of other industries. And the taxpayer is left with the mess to clean up. Yes, there are some employment benefits, but the estimates are always exaggerated. It's like dealing with the most shady used car salesman you've ever dealt with. They said these gold mines were going to be open for 10, 15, 20 years. Well, here we are. They've already closed up and left. So, yes, go ahead and look for the uranium, but I think we need to really bear down on these people and deal with them like you would someone that you hate. Not someone you're in bed with, not someone that you're trying to sway or entice to come to the province. You make them come to the table with a deal that's beneficial for everyone. And I would love to see, like I said, I couldn't find anything online, but I'd love to see the numbers of what the province actually gained from having these gold mines here in the last 10 to 15 years.
Right. Okay, Brian, listen, I think you make some great points. Thanks for the call, pal. Appreciate it.
All right, bud.
All right, take care. 902-405-6000. Absolutely, when you're dealing with these companies that have vested interest to profit off us, we should have definitely a skeptical approach and a very cautious approach, and this is hence the role of government that we hope that they would. And we put our trust in government to be that steward for us and our advocate on our behalf. And perhaps that trust is misplaced in some cases. 902-405-6000. What is on your mind today? We'll continue with your calls when we come back. All right, continuing with your calls, 902-405-6000. Again, 902-405-6000. Here's a quick email from Rob, then back to the phones. Rob on Nova Scotia Power breach said if there are no specific consequences for shareholders or managers at Nova Scotia Power, these sorts of violations of consumer privacy will continue. We need targeted legislation and meaningful penalties to address Nova Scotia Power's shortcomings. And he's speaking to the fact that, of course, Wayne MacKay was on the show earlier, law professor emeritus, Dalhousie University. And basically, the long and short of it is we don't have the statute or statutes. Basically, that's translated into law, the applicable law, as some provinces have, in order to allow people to respond litigiously to this type of breach, whether it be on an individual level or a class action level. That was basically Wayne MacKay's response. And Rob, I agree with you 100%. We should, if we had a proactive government looking at this, take steps in order to beef up and create these statutes in order to protect us moving forward. Be proactive, because these types of breaches are going to continue. And look, it's just I think it would make sense and would be prudent in order to have laws protecting us here in Nova Scotia, the public. 902-405-6000. That is the way to reach us. Again, 902-405-6000. Mike, hello.
Hey, how are you doing this morning?
I'm well, you?
All good. My thing is with this Nova Scotia Power, when they say go to this company to monitor your credit ratings, well, that's fine and dandy for today. But 2 years down the road, Nova Scotia Power is going to go back to the taxpayer and say, oh, we're broke, we need more money. So technically, they're not paying for anything, are they not?
Well, they say, I read this morning that insurance, they have insurance that's covering their losses for this. So they say that ratepayers won't be impacted yet anyway. So,
yeah, to be seen.
Yeah, to be seen. That's right. That could change for sure.
And for the exploration thing, why couldn't the Nova Scotia government or whatever say, okay, you want to mine uranium, 1/3 for the province, 1/3 for the company, and 1/3 put into a kitty so that when it's time to clean up, if you don't clean up, we'll use that money. If you clean up, we'll give it back to you, and then you'll get 2/3. And that's my theory on that.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure that I'm not sure what the contracts look like. I'm sure. Perhaps there is some type of language in there which deals with reclamation and what to do after the fact. I don't know that for sure, but yeah, you would hope that the government would be proactively building in a clause into the contract that would protect us. So when it comes time to clean up, as you call it, a reclamation, that would be covered for sure.
Yep. Anyway, you have a great day.
Okay, Mike, take care. 902-405-6000. Give us a call. Get some open lines for you. Again, 902-405-6000. Lee, hello.
Yeah, good morning. I got a letter from Nova Scotia Power, and I phoned the number, and they said, well, if you don't have an email, we can't help you. I'm not a computer person. I don't want a computer. Then I phoned Nova Scotia Power, and they said, well, we'll have to get back to you, or our team will have to look at this. So this whole thing is just a complete joke as far as I'm concerned. And one other thing, a couple other things, the water department. If you knew how it was run, it's devastating. It's just, there has to be an investigation for the water department because they've been getting away with murder for years. And it's just unbelievable how it's run. If you knew, you would just shake your head. And another quick thing, Todd, is this 1% that Carney's giving to the middle class. So you get a half a percent for 2025, and 26 you get another half. Like that's a drop in the bucket. I mean, and I haven't heard anything for seniors. A lady had her insurance went up on her house $1,000. She's a senior citizen. She's having a really, really hard time. I just don't understand why Carney really hasn't spoken up for the seniors. Anyways, Todd, that's it. Thanks. Have a great day.
Okay, Lee, take care. 902-405-6000. On the tax break, he's absolutely correct. I agree. Look, we'll take whatever we can get. So if it's a few $100s per person or per household, or less than $1,000 a year, then that's something, I suppose. That's better than nothing. But will it change anybody's life at all? Absolutely not. Will it fix the issue of affordability? No, it will not. It's kind of like the GST holiday, right? It doesn't actually change anybody's life. It doesn't fix any problem. It spins well. It's good it's good politically because it's tax breaks and governments can rally around that and do so, and politicians can rally around that. But will it actually change your life in any way, shape, or form, this 1% tax cut? And I would say not. It will not do one thing to improve your life other than, I suppose, a few $100 in your bank account over the run of a year. But it's like $10-20 a month or something like that if you factored in what the total savings would be to you. Again, depending on your economic situation, I would suggest that is not going to solve anything. 902-405-6000. Eric, hello.
Hey, good morning, Todd. How are you this morning?
I'm well, you?
Not too bad. Getting ready for the big game. It's probably going to be the most watched series that we ever seen because Canada's going to be represented. But these two teams were pretty damn good during the regular season and in the playoffs. Skinner will have to stand on his head. But I'm going with, because Edmonton has the last game at home, I think Edmonton's going to take it in 7 to set up a rematch, like a rubber match, and that's the way I see it. I don't know how you see it.
Well, it's hard to say, really. You don't know how it's going to go. I think it'll be tight, obviously. It's a rematch. The fact that Edmonton has home ice advantage, I think, is a good thing. Last year, they went down 3-0 and got in a big hole and almost came back and won it. I think that it could be Edmonton's year, but who knows? Eric, they're missing Hyman. That's a big loss there for sure. Florida's damn good, man. They got Bobrovsky. They're just good. We saw them against the Leafs. We saw what they did to Carolina. I don't really know, but I think that it'll be a great series. I don't think it'll be the most watched Stanley Cup final of all time simply because of the time zone difference in Edmonton. I think the Florida games people will watch, the Edmonton games, and Eric, I just can't help but think that the season is just too long. We're well into June. It's going to be mid-June, heading into late June before this thing wraps up, and to me it's tough to keep interested in hockey when the weather's this good. And
here's something that people should look at. Game 3 last year, they lost by 1 goal.
Yeah.
They won the next 3.
Yeah.
I say that if Edmonton had won that game, and I use it very bluntly, if they had won that game, I think they would have won the Stanley Cup last year because the next 3 games, Edmonton outplayed Florida.
Well, they won the next 3 games, so yeah, obviously. But
I'm saying they outplayed them. Edmonton outplayed them. I mean, I know Edmonton won the next 3, but if they win that 3rd game, that's the big if.
Yeah,
there.
Well, if is small, right? We could say if all day, but they didn't. So bottom line is.
Well, that's true too. But I'll go with Edmonton because I'm a true Canadian, and I think that it's going to go 7.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Thanks, Eric.
Okay,
take care. 902-405-6000. George giving us a call. Hello, George.
Yes, good morning, sir. Thanks for taking my phone call.
Sure
Two quick
thing.
things.
Yeah.
Nova Scotia, Northern Pulp was not get up and just left Nova Scotia. They were forced to leave by the former Liberal government because they wouldn't cooperate with them at all on their treatment plant. It just kept adding more and more and more conditions until they ran out of time. The other thing is Nova Scotia Power. I'm surprised that nobody hasn't called in about this before. But originally, back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and Gloria or Bill could probably comment on this, we had a company called Nova Scotia Light and Power Company. I don't ever remember the power going out at any time, and we had some serious snowfalls. In 1960, we had a 32-inch snowfall. It snowed for 2 solid days, and it just shut down everything down our way in South Shore. And I don't remember the power going out at all. Then along comes, I think, the Liberal government under Gerald Regan and said, well, we can't let them have a monopoly. They used to trim under their lines, and they used to do this and do that, keep their lines up and everything. Along comes the Liberal government and says they can't have a monopoly. I think it was the Liberal government under Gerald Regan, and I can be corrected, and said, well, we can't let them have a monopoly. We're going to have to take this over. So the government took it over, and they let a lot of Nova Scotia Light and Power Company employees go. And as you know, the government is not the best group of people to run anything and run it properly. So then they turned it back and they privatized it again under Nova Scotia Power. And a lot of the deadwood from the former government-run organization went over to Nova Scotia Power. And that's one of the big reasons we're in the mess we are today. Like I say, when we had Nova Scotia Light and Power, I do not remember any time the power going out or having anywhere near the problems we are having now. So that's what caused all this mess, and unfortunately, you're not going to get it straightened out unless some magic thing happens.
Yeah, magic's not going to happen, right? I think we're stuck with this situation for a very long time, and it is a mess at this point, George.
You'll probably you probably are. Well, you are right 95% of the time. But the next time Gloria or Bill is on, just ask them at Nova Scotia Light and Power, because, like I say, back then, and I was around then, I don't ever remember the power going out. And they kept up their lines well. They just didn't pussyfoot around like they're doing now and trim 6 feet off this year and then come back 2 years later and do the same thing again. And it's a very poorly run company, especially when you can't get the CEO to come on your program and answer some questions.
You got it. Okay, George. Thanks for the call, pal.
Thank you, sir. You have a good day.
All right, take care. 902-405-6000. We got open lines for you folks. Give us a call. If you'd like to weigh in on something that you've heard, give us a buzz, 902-405-6000. Your calls continue when we come back. All right, continuing with your calls. The way to reach us, 902-405-6000. Again, 902-405-6000. That is the way to reach us. Again, 902-405-6000. Let's go back to the phone to talk to Gary. Hello, Gary.
Yes. You think that somebody works at the Nova Scotia Power behind this? Works there?
Behind it? You mean made the leak?
Yeah.
No. Well, look, who knows? I would hope not. I really would hope not. I would think not. But I guess we don't know, quite honestly, Gary. But I would. You can't 100% rule anything out, I suppose, but I wouldn't think so.
Do they have the police involved in it?
Well, yes. I believe the police have done some investigation into some. I do believe, but that's a good question, Gary. I don't know that, but I would hope that that's not the case, and certainly there's been no reason for me to agree or to assume that that's the case, but I suppose you never know. Yeah,
because a lot of stuff goes on, like the hacking on a lot of your computers working there. I know somebody's a specialist in computers. He says he thinks somebody in Nova Scotia Power is behind it.
Well, again, that's pure speculation, Gary. We don't know that, so I can't I can't really entertain that, but I can't, by the same token, rule it out entirely because you never know. I just don't know, Gary.
Because I got a letter. I'm not happy about it.
Yeah, I'm not happy about it either, for sure.
No, because I think what is going to happen is people are going to have to get a lawyer and sue Nova Scotia Power.
Well, like I said, we had Wayne MacKay on the show earlier, and he said that because of the statutes or lack thereof in Nova Scotia, there's no law on the book that will allow for that.
Yeah, I know. It's awful. All of your information, your social insurance number, they can go do anything now. That's why I had to go change my bank stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it's not only banking; it's identity theft that is the real concern. To me, that's where the real currency is. And with the social insurance number, obviously that's compromised.
Yeah, that's what makes me mad. Like all your information about you. That's what hurts.
Yeah, absolutely, Gary. I'm very concerned. I think everybody should be concerned. But the CRA's been hacked. The Canadian Revenue Agency has been hacked, and there have been health agencies that have been hacked. There have been lots of hacks out there. So this is just the first that it's happened. I suppose that's garnered this kind of attention here in Halifax. But this is not new, unfortunately, and it's not going to be. Unfortunately, it's going to continue to happen. I think we're going to see hacks like this more and more.
Yeah, presumably our information be all over the place.
Well, and might already be, Gary. That's just it, right? We don't know. And I would bet that this is not a one-off, and I would bet that we're going to see more of it to come in the months and years to come. Thanks, Gary.
Yeah.
All right, take care. 902-405-6000. Why wouldn't it be the case that we're going to see more and more of this? As AI develops and the ability to hack into systems, and look, are companies investing the right amount of money into safeguarding against this? I would bet in many cases not. And again, these are some of the questions that I would love to ask the CEO of Nova Scotia Power, Peter Gregg. How much money have you invested into cybersecurity? How much money are you investing into cybersecurity? And what assurances can you give anybody that things are going to improve or have improved? 902-405-6000. David, hello.
Hi, Todd. Yeah, I just want to comment on Nova Scotia Power. The letter I received was dated May 9th. I received it on May 22nd, so that's 13 days, as to the point of him not coming on the radio. Nova Scotia Power should have, through, private radio stations, and the CBC definitely just had continuous public service announcements every half hour. I'm sure the CBC would be happy to do that, and your station likewise. But I guess the thing with responsible data is, or data use, is to be responsible with it and to sort of ask the question, do you need it? And if not, don't collect it. So when it comes to social insurance numbers, how does the Halifax Public Library deal with people who have the same name? I assume that's date of birth and address. So, if you don't need to collect a social insurance number, don't. There was a woman who called your show a few days ago, and she was an employee, I forget, Sobeys or Superstore 30 years ago, and her data was compromised in a breach. So another aspect of responsible data is, do you need to be hanging on to this stuff for that long? If not, delete it, then it's not out there to be stolen. Or if just for some reason, you absolutely absolutely got to do it, we'll print off the paper copies, archive them and lock them in a safe. And that way, if they do get stolen, it's going to be sort of done locally and not just sort of halfway around the world. So it just significantly reduces your threat. So, there's a lot there in terms of just if they're doing the sort of appropriate things, just to, make use of this private information that belongs to us, and to what extent they should legitimately be.
Did you get a letter, David? Did you get a letter?
I did. Yeah, I did.
And have you signed up for TransUnion?
Yeah, I have, and that's the one thing, listening to the CBC, this is like a lifetime thing. Your information, especially if it's your social insurance number and banking information, is out there forever. So, I did the TransUnion, and I called Nova Scotia Power to find out what's been compromised. They were supposed to email me, I guess, and that was sort of, I would have expected to have it already, but, I'll give them a couple of days and stuff. But, hopefully, because I never did, like, the direct deposit or anything, so hopefully they don't have my bank information. I wouldn't assume that they'd have my social insurance number yet. When I signed up with them 20 years ago, maybe they did demand it of me in order for the, as the CEO says, to identify me, uniquely, but I don't really think you need social insurance number to do that. So we'll find out, I guess, in the next couple of days or so.
Okay, bud. Thanks for the call, as always.
Right on. Thank you.
All right, take care. Thanks for the calls, everybody. We appreciate it very much. We'll open the phone lines again tomorrow between 11 and 12. Health advocates express concern about the potential alcohol sales changes in Nova Scotia. We'll talk about this when we come back. Saw this story recently on the CBC website as the Nova Scotia government prepares to uncork consultation on whether to expand retail options for alcohol in the province. A coalition of health groups is calling for those talks to be transparent and for consideration of potential risks to play a factor in any decision. Joining us to discuss all this is Cara Thompson, Associate Professor and Research Chair in Substance Use Policy at St. Francis Xavier University. Professor, thanks for joining the show. We appreciate your time, of course.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
All right. So what is your stance on all of this?
Yeah, so when we're thinking about access to alcohol, the government's moving to expand that access to put alcohol in grocery and convenience stores. And we're really concerned that that's going to have a negative impact on healthcare and on Nova Scotians.
Okay, and what's the data say? Is there data that would back up that concern?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we already know that Nova Scotians experience a lot of harms and costs from alcohol. In 2022, there was almost 600 deaths from alcohol. There's over 45,000 emergency hospital visits annually from alcohol. And we know that the costs in the actual economic costs in terms of healthcare and loss of productivity and enforcement exceed what the government's making in revenue from alcohol. So by expanding access, we're not really getting a lot of economic gains. All we're going to have is a greater burden on an already broken healthcare system and greater impact on Nova Scotian individuals, families, and communities.
Okay, but when you say expanding access, do we know that translates into more consumption?
Yes, we do. There's a lot of research that shows that greater access is associated with higher consumption, which is associated with higher risk of harms. And the argument that's been put forth is an argument of convenience, that, we're going to make alcohol more convenient in this province. But alcohol is already very convenient in this province. We have more alcohol outlets than we have Tim Hortons. We have 300 outlets across the province that sell alcohol. That's about one for every 3,500 Nova Scotians. So we really don't have a convenience issue in this province right now. And by doing this, we're just going to create problems.
Okay, so when it comes to the health ramifications and there's a direct correlation between the amount of alcohol that is sold and the health outcomes, it's proportional, is it?
Yeah, so the more access, the more health costs. And other provinces have done this. Ontario has done this. BC has done this. And the research coming out of those provinces shows that increased access has been associated with increased consumption. New Brunswick just defeated a proposal to expand to convenience stores, and I think we should follow suit.
Okay, what are the arguments for it? I guess just simple convenience or a lack of government involvement in people's lives. I guess the civil liberty thing. I don't know. What are the counter arguments that you've heard?
Yeah, well, I mean, alcohol is under the Ministry of Finance in Nova Scotia. It's not under the Ministry of Health. Mm-hmm. It's often viewed as an economic issue, and so the arguments are for more jobs and greater investment in local economy in small communities. So there's obviously, convenience stores will benefit from selling these products, as would local producers. But it's simply not worth the cost. We really have to acknowledge that alcohol is a carcinogen. It causes cancer, and it, for many Nova Scotians, is already negatively impacting their lives. And I don't think we need added convenience is not worth that cost.
Okay, we hear the stories about that come out regularly from the Canadian Cancer Society. You mentioned carcinogens and warnings from various organizations about alcohol. Yet alcohol is the drug of choice here in Canada and in the Western world, and certainly in Nova Scotia, I would say. Why do you think that is? And changing attitudes is obviously something that is a big challenge here, and this is part of, I'm sure, the battle here when it comes to this initiative.
Yes, you make a great point. It's deeply embedded in our culture. A lot of that is driven by the alcohol industry marketing alcohol to us as a necessity for having, a good time. And certainly this, our advocacy is not saying don't drink. Our advocacy is just saying let's not make it more available to encourage more people to drink or to drink more. There's a lot of social benefits that people get from alcohol, and but there are significant risks. I think our goal from a public health perspective is to just make sure that people have the information to help them make informed decisions about their consumption. And by increasing access and kind of putting it in our faces, it's going to lead to more consumption, more harms, and particularly increased access among young people.
Yeah, we often hear people comparing us to Europe and places where wine is served with every meal and whatever. What response do you give or do you have when people make that comparison, us to places like Europe?
Yeah, we get that a lot, and a lot of that's anecdotal, right? It's something that's kind of been a myth for decades that the Europeans are doing it right and we're not. But the evidence is very clear that these countries like France or Italy are experiencing just as much or greater harms from their alcohol use as we are in North America. There's huge issues with liver cirrhosis, alcohol-related cancers. They may not always have the binge drinking culture that we see so prominent among young people in Canadian culture. But they are certainly experiencing the negative impacts of alcohol today.
Okay, on the politics side of it here in Nova Scotia, do you feel as though that the government is leaning towards this more so than not? What are your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. I think the wheels are in motion for this to go forward, which is why what we're advocating for is an open and public consultation. The government has announced that they will do consultation with 250 stakeholders, but what's important is who those stakeholders are and whose voices is at the table. Is the IWK being consulted? Is the Nova Scotia Health Authority being consulted? Those are the people that see the negative impacts of alcohol on the front lines every day. So we want to make sure that health and public health and safety voices are part of that consultation. They're spending a lot of money to do this consultation, and we don't want it to be lip service. We want to make sure that Nova Scotians who are going to be impacted have a say in what happens.
Okay, the fact that the government is rolling a survey here in order to gauge support or the sentiment of Nova Scotians, is that a good thing, or what are your thoughts on the survey?
I mean, public polling is pretty biased. You can make anything go in your direction if the wording of the survey is right. They're only surveying 1,500 Nova Scotians. That's a pretty small sample and likely to be unrepresentative of the average Nova Scotian. I think the consultations are more powerful than a public opinion survey because often people don't have the facts or the questions are framed in a way that can make it feel biased. So the consultations, I think, are the more important part of this consultation process. We just want to make sure that the right people have the say.
Professor, interesting and insightful. Thanks for doing this. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks so much.
All right, take care. Kara Thompson, Associate Professor and Research Chair in Substance Use Policy at St. Francis Xavier University. Nova Scotia General Employees Union supports the public consultation on alcohol sales in Nova Scotia. We'll chat with the president of NSGEU, Sandra Mullen, when we come back. All right, something that we're going to do later on in the show between 12:30 and 1, we're going to chat with Jesse Roach, a co-owner who co-owns and operates Scotia Pest Solutions. And we will take your calls regarding pest control and prevention. And this is something that a lot of people have some issues with to some degree, whether it be rodents in your house or whatever it is. We will take your calls if you've got a pest problem. Jesse Roach will do his best to give you a hand. We'll do that between 12:30 and 1. So look forward to chatting with Jesse Roach and taking your calls concerning pests. That's right, folks. It's a good way to start a Monday. Talk about pests. All right, this story. Police are warning older adults in Halifax there is an increase in a loved one scam in the region. Officials said they have responded to a rise in fraud targeting seniors with 5 reports in the past week. They're telling people that scammers want to build trust with them and then take advantage of the relationship. In the recent incidents, a victim receives a call from someone pretending to be a family member saying they have been arrested. In some cases, scammers have used artificial intelligence to clone the loved one's voice. A second person saying they are from the legal system is involved and tells the victim they need to pay money to have their loved one released from custody. Police are asking people not to give any personal information during these situations. Here's a quote. In Canada, law enforcement and court officials will not attend a residence to collect money in relation to bail, officials say. Halifax police released photos of a courier and vehicle they believe are involved in the scam. They're open to speak to the person. Any information on his identity can be reported at 902-490-5020. So this is just another example, unfortunately, of people scamming. And this is again, people will stop at nothing in order to scam you. They will stop at nothing, absolutely nothing. And with AI and technology that's being developed now and websites being mirrored, and it's just, look, you don't know what to trust anymore. This is the challenge that we're living in, right? We're living in look, there are a lot of great things happening. We talk about challenging times and a lot of concern, and it's out there. And people, look, it's justified. Because, look, if people can figure out a way to scam you, they will do so. And technology, unfortunately, is a vulnerability that exists. And although technology can be a great thing, it can be used for great purposes and is used for great purposes. It can also be used for nefarious reasons as well. And when it comes to, technology, we've been told with every iteration of technology, whether it be the radio or the printing press or TV or the internet or whatever, that they would be detrimental and would cause problems societally, and that has manifested itself. With that all said, it's come with some good as well. Think about the opportunity that social media provides people to have a voice that would not have had a voice otherwise. Countless examples of people who have been wronged and have received justice because of the internet and social media. They have been able to reach thousands, if not millions of people. That would not have been the case beforehand. That said, it gets abused, and misinformation and disinformation is a reality. So with everything good comes some bad, and everything bad usually comes some good as well. And it's about balancing it and figuring out a way to make it all work. This story on the Global News website, at first glance, the global touring industry seems to be doing well. Live Nation, the largest concert promoter and ticketing company, reported earlier this month that it was having an amazing year. More than 100 million tickets have been sold for events in 2025 so far, compared to 2019, the last big year before COVID-19, of course, when Live Nation had sales of 98 million tickets for the entire 12 months. Economic slowdown, tariff-related issues, fan rebellions against the high cost of tickets. None of those dire predictions seem to be coming true. Live music is having a banner year. Well, maybe for some. Again, the story goes on to say. One major event didn't sell out for the second year running, and those who did go, more than half financed their ticket purchases. Other festivals have been canceled, according to Tracker Music Festival Wizard. 44 events have disappeared from the global concert calendar so far this year. In the UK, promoters shaken by the 72 festival cancellations last year are bracing for more problems. A few Australian festivals won't be happening because of rising costs. 4-day general admission tickets for Lollapalooza sold out within an hour, although 1- and 2-day tickets as well as VIP passes are still available. Just this week, a festival company called Wawanisa dropped more than 10 events across Britain. The company has gone under. And, of course, the story goes on to say the current U.S. administration isn't helping matters, although after unilaterally raising the price of visas from foreign acts, there are the stories of homeland security issues at the border. Who wants to risk setting up an expensive American tour when a border patrol agent can refuse you entry because, well, for any reason they choose? Something on your social media feed found in your phone that they don't like, you're not getting in. You might even be detained for some time before being deported. And if you're a top-tier performer, you might be immune to such petty concerns, but even Beyonce had trouble with her Cowboy Carter tour with thousands of tickets unsold. Even as opening night approached, that April 28th date in Los Angeles struggled to sell the remaining 3,200 tickets. She even had to lower prices to fill seats in other markets, annoying fans who bought tickets early. So, yeah, look, folks, it's the cost of these concerts and these festivals are it's got to be more reasonable, in my humble opinion. I don't know anybody who can afford to spend. I shouldn't say I don't know anybody. I can't afford to spend $500 and $600 a ticket to go see a musical act. And would refuse to, even though I could afford it. I'm not paying that kind of money. I'm just not. And I think that perhaps a lot of these events have priced themselves out of reality for many of us. And look, it's probably, I get it that everybody wants to recoup costs and it's expensive to tour now, and there's a lot of expenses when it comes to fuel and accommodation and all of it, but you can only get so much from people, in my humble opinion, and this is just another example, I think, of that. Federal Industry Minister Melanie Joly says Ottawa is committed to using Canadian steel and aluminum in national infrastructure and defense projects. She told the aluminum industry leaders at a summit in Montreal that the government is waiting to see if U.S. President Donald Trump follows through on his threat to increase steel and aluminum tariffs to 50% through an executive order. The United Steelworkers Union says it welcomes Joly's announcement. The Liberals campaigned in the recent election on maximizing the use of Canadian steel, aluminum, and forestry products in public projects. And the European Union says it's preparing countermeasures against the United States after President Donald Trump's tariffs on steel rattled global markets. The threat also complicated the ongoing wider tariff negotiations between Brussels and Washington. An EU Commission spokesperson says it's prepared to go on the defense if trade negotiations in those talks fail. The European Union appears to be finalizing an expanded list of countermeasures that would automatically take effect in mid-July or earlier. So the Donald Trump tariff war continues to cause problems for countries all around the world, certainly here in Canada, and instability, folks. This is the biggest challenge with markets and with all involved is instability, because we know that markets like stability and predictability, and investment needs that as well. So in order for companies to invest deeply into projects and infrastructure projects or whatever it might be, they need stability in pricing and knowing that they can get the products that they need. And when steel and aluminum, think of the automotive industry and all that gets built with steel and aluminum, including housing. And when you factor all that in and the unknown quantity or entity that is Donald Trump, then we have a recipe for this. And market volatility and instability, and it impacts a lot. And many people, most economists that I hear and that I read and follow would tell you that Donald Trump's approach, it doesn't make any sense at all, and it's not effective at all, and it's not going to achieve what he thinks it's going to achieve. And I agree with that, obviously. It would be nice to just have some stability, for goodness sakes. But that's not going to happen until Donald Trump is out of office, whenever that is, however long that takes. All right, pest control and prevention. Do you have a problem with a pest, whether it be a rodent or silverfish or whatever it is? Give us a call now. Jesse Roach is co-owner and operates Scotia Pest Solutions, and he'll join us for the next half hour to take your calls. The way to reach us is 902-405-6000. Again, 902-405-6000. We'll take your calls, pest related, when we come back. All right, obviously some technical glitches going on today. It's a Monday, I suppose. We'll blame the fact that it's a Monday on the technical glitches going on, but nonetheless, here we go. Jesse Roach, co-owner and operates Scotia Pest Solutions. Jesse, thanks for joining the show.
Hey, how are you doing today? Happy Monday.
Happy Monday indeed. All right, so tell us all about your business.
Yeah, I mean, I've been personally doing pest control for a decade, and we've been running a local company out here in the Valley for the last 3 years, and we've been able to create a few really great jobs and help a lot of people.
Okay, sounds good. So what we're going to do over the next half hour is we're going to take people's calls, and I'm sure that you get a lot of people asking you for free advice all the time. What are some of the more common questions that you hear, Jesse, that people ask you?
A lot of the time, I'd say the most walk-up question I get is, I've got a rodent in my house, in my barn, in my whatever, and it doesn't matter what I do, I can't seem to trap it, right? Usually a rat. They're like, I got one rat and I can't trap it. I've tried this, I've tried that, I've tried everything. And I always recommend to them, where rats are so smart, sometimes you have to train them. So you get a nice Victor snap trap with a paddle on it, you put some cat food on it, and you don't set it. And you leave it where you know the rat is.
Right.
And you wait until it starts feeding on it. Maybe it takes 4 days, 5 days, because they're neophobic, so they're afraid of new objects. But once it gets comfortable, then you set it.
Right. How do people know they only have one rat?
Oh, everyone always only has one. That's what they think.
Yeah.
I got one.
But the reality is probably if you get one, you get more than one. That's probably the reality, is it not?
A lot of the time, yes.
Yeah, especially with mice, right? I mean, there's never just one mouse.
Yeah. Very, very unlikely.
Okay, all right. If you've got a question, if you'd like to chat with Jesse, again, he's available to answer your calls for the next half hour, 902-405-6000. Again, 902-405-6000, that's the way to reach us. Is the rat problem, we hear that the rat problem is very serious here in Halifax. Is it very serious?
Oh, yeah. I'd say rodents overall are at their highest numbers ever, right?
Really?
Since modern pest control. It's so mild all winter now in Atlantic Canada and Nova Scotia that they just continue reproducing all year around, and they're not getting that weather shock of a month worth of -16, right? So if you're a rodent and you're just living in the woods or in a ditch somewhere, if there's no prolonged freezing temperature, it's really easy to get that next generation on the go, right?
What do they feed on? What do they eat?
Rodents and rats will eat anything. They're like us, omnivores, so they eat meat, insects, seeds, with like population growth as well too. Like they're very adaptable, so they'll find where the food is. They'll take advantage of it. I always use the word opportunistic. So if you give them one of the things they need, water, food, or shelter, they're going to take advantage of that.
For sure.
And with population growth, there's more food, and there's more things going on. And then, like with the different kind of work that they're doing on, tearing down old buildings and updating infrastructure. There's rats that have been settled in that are getting moved around as well from that.
Are they territorial?
Rats can be, like, you won't find, like I always tell people, you can have rats in your attic and you can have mice in your basement, but you won't have rats and mice in your attic.
Why is it just because they won't share the same space, or?
No, they won't. The rats will basically get after the mice.
Right. Okay, 902-405-6000. That's the way to reach us if you'd like to chat with Jesse. If you got a question concerning pests, Don's giving us a call. Hello, Don.
Hey, good day. I guess we'll get the ant conversation over with, because that's going to be coming sometime this afternoon.
Okay.
I've got the little tiny ants at the front door and the door to the deck, and then we got the bigger ants out in the driveway. I'm wondering what would be the best way to treat. So far, we've gone with Ant Be Gone, little drops by the door. Seems to work. They seem to take it and either die on the spot or go away. Take it. Apparently, I think they take it back to the nest. But the bigger problem, well, they do keep coming back, the little guys. The bigger problem, I guess, is the ones outside. They're more like the big black ants. I don't know if you call them carpenter ants or what they are, but they just seem to stay outside for the most part.
Along the driveway.
Yeah.
If you could source their nest along the driveway, or source that crack that they're in, you could use an over-the-counter ant nest buster permethrin spray, get it right into their nest, and probably have pretty good success that way. For the inside ants, you really want to break up their pheromone trail. Like that one ant came in one time, found one piece of sugar, and now they just keep coming back looking for it. So you want to really, it's cleaning up that pheromone trail using some kind of like a Javex wipe or some kind of antimicrobial just to break it up so they don't keep coming in.
Oh, okay. So kill them first, and then Javex it, and then wait for them to come back before you treat it again.
You want to break up that pheromone trail because that's why they keep coming. And the other thing, too, that you said about the Ant Be Gone bait, if you're seeing workers die from eating it, it's formulated too strong, so it's not making it back to the ant colony. Only 10% of an ant nest actually comes out for foraging purposes. So all the nursing ants and the queen are underground doing their business, and if the bait's not making it all the way to them, you're not going to have that systemic colony collapse that gives you long-term results.
Okay. So try something a little less toxic.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta. If you're seeing them die from the bait, it's too strong.
Okay.
Right. They have to make it back. They have to make it back so that they can transfer it. Like they transfer their food mouth to mouth prophylaxis, and if they're not able to do that to make it work its way through the colony, then you're going to have that little reprieve of like 4 or 5 days of like, oh, the ants are gone and they're back again. It's the same colony. They just rebuilt.
Okay.
Okay, Don. Right, good luck.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Secure 902-405-6000. Carl, hello.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for the time. So rodents are a serious problem here in Halifax. It's absolutely nuts. And I've seen it in other places. One of the things, now see, like places like in Florida, there's a lot of snakes, right? And so they're not poison. Well, there are poisonous snakes too, but there's just not enough snakes. One full-grown red rat snake, which is like 5 feet long, because they invade the nest and they eat all the little pinkies, all the babies. One snake, 5 feet long, consumes like 5 to 6 1,000 rodents, just that one snake. And so there's just not enough snakes here. And honestly, is there any possibility of introducing snakes that would, take care of this problem in a lot of ways?
I mean, if it keeps getting warmer here, I'm sure snakes will be the next problem, but we'll also have termites behind them, so it'll be kind of a thing. But yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. Like, there's not enough, especially in rural or in like the city areas. There's not enough predators for the rodents. They're very comfortable. They're very isolated in their little spaces, be it in like an old building or be it in like some kind of, industrial area where they're not being bothered. They're just left to reproduce.
Yeah, and it can get out of hand really, really quick.
Yeah. Okay.
I discussed this with Dr. Rob Thacker a couple years ago, and because there are snakes that eat rodents, there's more of a concentration of them in Ontario, but they should be able to survive here in Nova Scotia as well. What do you think of the idea of introducing snakes to our province?
You know what? I love it, but my wife wouldn't.
Yeah.
And that would be what it would be, right? Like, because it could be, I don't know a lot about snakes, but I know they have a lot of young when they do reproduce, and it could turn into kind of like the python problem that they have down south, where it's just they have no natural predator, so then you're overrun with a certain kind of snake. But I like it for organic pest control reasons. If it was some kind of way that could be introduced and controlled, it's a really cool theory.
Okay, Carl, thanks for the call, pal.
All right, have a good day.
All right, take care. 902-405-6000. Again, 902-405-6000. Jesse Roach, owner of Scotia Pest Solutions, taking your calls. We'll be back. All right, Jesse Roach co-owns and operates Scotia Pest Solutions, taking your calls, 902-405-6000. That's the way to reach us. John, hello.
How you doing there, Todd and Jesse?
Doing well.
Hey, I had a mice problem for quite some time. Anyhow, found the access, how they were getting in, and actually there was two. And we found them, covered them up, and however, I got one mouse, and it's been over a month, and I went to Ace Pest Control, and I got all the sticky pads, laid them down. There's peanut butter, there's cheese, there's even seed on them. And this little guy won't go to the sticky pad. And I have him in several different areas, and it's almost like he knows, like, not to go on there. And now he's traveling around the house, like into the cabinets and stuff like that, and getting up to dry goods.
So I'll tell you what happens when you bait a glue board. If you put food on a glue board, they're going to sniff their way up to it, and their whiskers are going to get caught on the glue board first, and then they pull away and they know that is sticky. Your best bet, if you're trapping with glue boards, is to get them up against a wall along a path that they travel.
I see.
With no bait on them.
With no bait.
Right up against the wall. Because rodents will travel up along the wall naturally.
Yeah.
And they do, right? So you want to get that glue board right up against the wall with no bait on it, and that would be the best way to go trapping about that. Also, like, I'm a big advocate of snap traps. Like if you get a good Victor snap trap with a paddle trigger, put a little bit of put a little Betty Crockett vanilla frosting on there, and you should be able to get your mouse.
Okay. What about those little mouse houses, like those little plastic little things that you trap, like they crawl into? Are they any good at all?
I don't use them. Like we use Victor snap traps, right? It's something that they figured out, like 100 years ago, and they work.
Okay.
I like the ones and the one with the paddle on them too. You want the paddle, not the metal trigger, but the paddle.
With the paddle,
right.
Okay. Yeah. And where would you recommend to purchase them? Canadian Tire or something like that?
Yeah, I've seen them in like Home Hardware's, Canadian Tire. I've seen them at all those stores. And the same thing goes with the snap trap. You want to get that trigger up against the wall.
Okay. Damn it. All right. And what do you recommend to bait them? Again, vanilla, you say?
Yeah, I use Betty Crocker vanilla frosting.
Betty Crocker, okay, vanilla frosting.
Yeah.
All right,
Works
I'll
really
give it a
good.
try. It does, eh?
Yeah.
Okay, because I was wondering, I had a mouse problem for quite some time, and it was like 30 mice I caught on these sticky pads. But this one particular guy, and it's the only one left, and the only guy left, and he won't go to it, for Christ, or for damn sakes.
Yeah.
But anyhow, all right, so I'll try it up against the wall.
Okay,
and,
John, good luck.
Try to pick up some snap traps. All right,
take care. You got it. 902-456-0000. Mike, hello.
Hey, me again. Sorry. This stuff that I was told to recommend it for ants called Bug Tech. Ever hear of it? Is it any good?
No, I don't know that product. Sorry.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Let's talk to Anthony. Hello, Anthony.
I don't know.
Hey, Anthony, are you there?
Yeah. All right.
Okay, put Anthony on hold. We'll go back to him. Elaine, hello.
Hello.
Hi there.
I have a rat burrow in my yard, and I was wondering what's the best way to discourage. I had those snap traps that last summer I got 14 rats. Before that, I got 20-some with a combination of snap traps and glue traps.
Yeah.
But I put rat rid down in the hole, but they still seem to be in the neighborhood.
Yeah. I mean, you can flush rats out of burrows or different. If they're burrowed under something, you can flush them out with like cayenne peppers or things like that to get them out of the hole. But I mean, this kind of leads to a point around. Sometimes you just need professional pest control to come in. You know, if someone has a bad enough electrical problem, they call electrician. If someone has a big leak in their house, they'll call a plumber. There's a stigma around calling pest control, but sometimes it's best just to call a professional to come in, to take a look at a situation, to get you to a point of pest-free living.
Yeah, I didn't want to fill it in because I thought, well, then they might dig under where I'm walking because it's right next to that.
Yeah, you could end up just moving it around, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
and I have a system in the yard behind me as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it might be time to bring in a professional, even just to get their insight on what's going on, and maybe there's something better to be done in your yard if you're catching that many, right?
Yeah, I can catch the little ones, but the big ones are too wise to it.
Yeah.
That's exactly it, right? So they're going to continue to be reproducing, and that's...
Okay, Elaine, good luck.
Sounds like it's time to bring in a pro.
Good luck, Elaine. Take care. All right, Anthony, quickly, if you can. Go ahead, Anthony.
Hi, I got a problem with spiders in my place. I've lived in lots of houses, but you always see spiders, but I see spiders every day in this house. And I had a professional company in to take care of it, and they're going to come back and spray again because it didn't make any impact. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on cellar spiders. Those are the ones that I see constantly, and I wonder if they're coming from the outside or could they be in the house? Like, could they have a nest or whatever they do in the house?
Yeah, cellar spiders, a lot of the time, they're starting in crawl spaces or they're starting in like an unfinished basement. Like I usually see them there, right? And what you have to remember is like spiders aren't living on fear alone. So if you can remove the moisture from these spaces and remove their prey insects by removing and lessening moisture, you're going to see less spiders.
Okay.
Because I assume you're seeing them like in your main living spaces, is what you're saying?
Well, they're mostly in the spaces where we're not most of the time. They're in the attached garage, or they're in a crawl space, or they're in a closet or something like that, right? They're not, but you do see them once in a while. You see them in a bedroom or the living room or something like that. But I just haven't been successful getting rid of them. And there's a lot of them. I mean, the last time I went around killing them, I probably killed 35 in one day. They're just everywhere. Yeah.
You got to find the source. There's got to be a space where there's a humidity issue. and that's where they're reproducing and then finding their way into your living spaces.
Okay, Anthony, out of time. Thanks for the call.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Jesse, thanks so much. It's been great. We'll do it again. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Todd.
All right, take care. Jesse Roach, co-owner and operations with Scotia Pest Solutions. Thanks for listening, everybody. We appreciate it very much. I'd like to thank Vanessa Van Ness, of course, on the other side of the glass. The control board's doing a fine job. As always, we're back tomorrow at 10 o'clock. See you then.